And joining us for more on tonight's topic is Ruth Beltran, the organizer for the Suncoast Answer Coalition, and Paul Sutton, a retired captain at the Sarasota Police Department. Thank you both for being here. And in full disclosure, we have to point out that Captain Sutton is related to our show's producer, but I want to thank you both for joining us. And,
thank you for having us.
Well, you know, this is such an important discussion, and obviously the community and the nation has been discussing this for a while, especially in the aftermath of recent police shootings earlier this summer and also what happened in Dallas. But Ruth, let me first ask you, because after the protest last weekend, a lot of people, the issue that they had was that the protesters shut down traffic outside of the mall, and on a day where it was, I believe, the last tax-free shopping day before school. And the question is that the best way to make the point while just members of the community are trying to do what they need to do on the weekend?
Well, if you know, transportation has been used by the civil rights movement for a number of years. And we saw that with the Selma March. Also, Rosa Parks took a stand at a public bus, in the Freedom Riders as well. So we wanted to make a statement. We wanted to, when you stop transportation, it's a way of making people stop and pay attention. It's really an act of civil disobedience, but it makes them stop. And as a result, we are still talking about it today, right? It did not just stop on Saturday, but people are still talking about it today because we stopped traffic.
But it made some people, many people from our Facebook comments, angrier than they otherwise would be.
Correct, and they have the right to be angry. However, our community is also angry. The many deaths that have been taking place in our community are really outrageous. And not just with law enforcement, but if you notice, there is also a systemic racism in America that affects our education system, our voters system, it affects our health care system. So it's really a systemic racism that we have in America. And the Black Lives Matter movement is trying to bring attention to that. So yes, we do want everyone to stop and look. If it takes them being angry and not being able to get through traffic for 15 minutes, then let it be.
Paul, what did you make of the protest inside the mall and the mall's statement that it was not the T-shirt that some of the protesters were wearing, but the fact that it's private property and they have every right to ban protests on private property?
The mall's position is correct. You know, when you have private property and you pay high rents and you have the expectation of having to service customers in order to make a living, that is something that you paid for. It's a right that you have. Free speech is certainly a right, but free speech shouldn't interfere with other people's rights.
Well, then let's talk a little bit again. After the protest inside the mall, it went outside. Traffic was stopped for I don't know how long, an hour on and off.
No. Traffic, we were really on the sidewalk. I believe the first time we stopped traffic just through a couple of green lights, probably 5 minutes or so. And then the second time we stopped traffic a little bit longer, but it was nowhere near half hour.
What position does that put law enforcement in? And in taking into account that it's our understanding law enforcement really didn't respond to that when it was taking place?
Every law enforcement officer takes an oath to obey the Constitution and to protect the rights of citizens. And free speech is a right that law enforcement gladly protects. And in fact, the most obvious recent example is Dallas, where a very large protest on a similar topic was going on, and the gunshots started, and police officers ran towards the gunshots to protect the very people that had been protesting. That's what a police officer is supposed to do. Now, if you're in a situation where traffic is blocked, that's dangerous. You know, you can have people who become frustrated. They try to drive around. You obviously don't want to have any contact between a pedestrian and a vehicle. So I would suggest to the protesters that there are other ways to protest without obstructing traffic. And once you obstruct traffic, you're actually violating laws at that time.
Well, law enforcement and police officers also take an oath to serve and protect. And as we see, that's not what they are doing. They are killing our black community, the black members of our community, and they are not being held responsible.
But you have two issues there. There is that, but there is also, and I see some of the, kind of ugly comments that were made on Facebook saying, that people saying, well, I'm just going to drive through the protesters, and that's the way people get hurt, and that's the way temperatures get even more elevated.
And that brings us to a very interesting point. People are very much against us saying Black Lives Matter, right? And they mention that all lives matter. However, they have no problem telling us that they are going to run us over. So where does it come to the point where all lives matter? Are you really saying that all lives but Black lives matter? Because the same people in social media that said that that all lives matter, the next sentence will actually be, we will run you over. I actually got threats saying, you better pray you're not standing in front of my truck. So it's really a hypocrisy. You want to say that all lives matter. However, you have no problem running over protesters who are really fighting for our lives. This is really the systemic racism that we have going on in America right now. It's generational, and it affects our daily lives. Many people who are not affected by it seem to ignore it or just pretend that it's not there, that they don't see the injustice that's taking place at the many levels of our society. But it's there. So we are protesting for our lives. This is a life and death situation right now. This is the world that I'm going to leave to my son tomorrow.
Ruth, can I say this?
Sure.
We are on the same side. I know sometimes it may not seem that way, but police officers are sworn to protect all people in all communities. And I will start by saying this, Black lives do matter. But I also believe that all lives matter. And during my career with the Sarasota Police Department, I investigated a number of crimes where Black lives had been lost. I made it my mission to find justice for the people who had committed these crimes. And literally, I and many other police officers put my life at risk to protect the citizens of North Sarasota. And so I believe that police officers believe that all lives matter. I think when you're looking at a profession that has 1 million people across the country engaged in the profession, am I going to stand by everything that every single officer does in every jurisdiction? Of course not.
But we can start by having accountability. When a police officer takes a life on an unarmed man, which is just an example of the many injustices that take place, they arrest Black people disproportionately. Even when people are sentenced within the justice system, they receive harsher punishments than any other community. They the police officers use of force against Black communities disproportionately. So when those things take place, the police department or the government needs to hold those police officers accountable, which is what's not taking place now. Everybody's getting a green pass. You can just shoot a Black man and walk away.
Let me just stop you there, because this community obviously has had difficulties over the years, just like many or most communities around the country. What I have noticed in the aftermath of the shootings from earlier this summer and the tragedy in Dallas is that local law enforcement has reached out to the community to have community meetings, and from that, it is my understanding that those meetings will be held on a more regular basis. So the question is whether this community, whether it's the Sarasota Police Department or the Sheriff's Office, are they doing more than other communities in terms of reaching out to the community and trying to have a continual and open dialogue?
They may be talking, but we do not need just conversation. We know that in the recent years, the Sarasota Police Department specifically has rehired officers that were found guilty for use of excessive force. One of those resulted in a death. And the Sarasota Police Department rehired these officers, and those officers are still in the force today. So where is accountability?
We only have a couple of seconds left, but I wanted to give you a moment to respond to that.
I can tell you that community policing is very important to the Sarasota Police Department. It is to Chief DePino, it was to Chief Holloway. And as far as any officers that are ever terminated, they have civil service protections. There are instances where the police department has literally fired the officer. That's all they can do, but there is an appeal process.
And we'll have to leave it there. I want to thank you both for coming in for this very important discussion.